Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Creative Care webinar series. It is so wonderful to be here on the last day of June before we enter July. And I can see people joining from all across different communities and sectors today, so thank you for being here with us. Please find a comfortable position. You can go right ahead and eat your lunch, drink some tea and coffee, and tune into this conversation. Welcome back to those who have joined us for the first and second session, and welcome to those who are new to this webinar series. My name is Christen Kong, and I'm a health promoter at Access Alliance Multicultural Health and Community Services, where I really focus on advancing newcomer mental health and well-being through the arts. One of my favorite parts of this role is supporting capacity building and mobilizing knowledge in ways that really can meaningfully shape everyday practice and community care. So things like these webinars. We are very excited to host our third Creative Care session. It is part of a six-part series to advance arts integration in healthcare and settlement. This series is funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada, part of the Hubs of Expressive Arts for Life project. And I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. So before we begin, as always, I would like to acknowledge the land in which many of us are gathered here today. Those of us in Toronto are on traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. As an organization serving immigrants and refugees facing many types of systemic barriers, we recognize the ongoing impacts of colonialism on Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and we honor the resilience and resistance of Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. So today's webinar is titled The Heal Project Explained: Cultural Colors and Trauma-Informed Tones. So some of you may be wondering, what is the HEAL project or program and why does it matter? We are going to be talking about that today. What does it mean to culturally tailor expressive arts programs specifically to newcomer communities? We have three of our HEAL facilitators today, which is so exciting. And we've adapted the program in various ways, meeting the cultural needs of specifically Arabic, Farsi, Bengali, Tigrinya speaking populations, LGBTQ+, as well as newcomer women who have experiences in the shelter system. So we want to really highlight some of the things that we have learned along the way, so that hopefully you come away with some of those wisdoms. So, as always, I will introduce who is in the room today because that is so important to know where we are coming from. So I'm going to start off in the green background, Maj. So Maj is a psychotherapist and expressive arts facilitator. They are trained in expressive arts therapy and draw from different trauma-informed somatic practices. They root their work in anti-oppressive and anti-colonial frameworks. Currently, they are finishing their master's in interdisciplinary studies at York University, where they research Palestinian migrants' experiences with the psychiatric and mental health systems in Canada. So thank you, Madge, for your very great work. Okay, next we have Afsane in the blue background. Afsane is an interdisciplinary artist, registered art therapist, and psychotherapist, and a person of diaspora of Iranian Canadian heritage. She is based in Toronto, and she graduated from Fine Arts from the University of Manitoba. She continued her studies in art therapy at the Toronto Art Therapy Institute. She has dedicated decades of clinical experience working with refugees, newcomers, war, torture, and trauma survivors. And she has been involved in helping a diverse population of all ages with their mental health struggles for the past 30 years. So thank you, Afsane. And last but not least, Victoria is in the red background. Victoria is an expressive arts therapist and registered psychotherapist providing body-centered trauma-informed care to children, adults, couples, and families. She supports anxiety, emotional regulation, and family transitions, offering services in English and Spanish. Her approach strengthens relationships, fostering resilience, autonomy, and meaningful change. So, thank you to all of you. And as you can see, we have such a wealth and rich array of experiences. So, I'm excited to jump into these conversations very soon. So, just a little bit of background because we are speaking and discussing about the HEAL project today, program. Um, Very common, factors of the HEAL program. It is a 12-session expressive arts therapy program that was made for newcomer women who were survivors of domestic violence. We piloted among 6 different communities, which I've mentioned. And so you'll notice that each of the panelists here were facilitators for a specific HEAL program. And what's really great is that they really brought themselves and their artistic experiences. So even though the HEAL program had very similar kind of curriculum or criteria, it looked very different among all the different populations. If you do want to learn more about it, I will be sending a link in the follow-up email about the actual program. So don't worry, you can read about it after this webinar. So to structure our discussion today, I'm going to invite the panelists to respond to 3 guiding questions. Each panelist will have the opportunity to share their perspectives and experiences. And throughout the webinar, I really, really highly encourage you to submit a question or comment in the Q&A feature, a part of the Zoom, and we will definitely get to some of those at the end of the session. And if we don't get to them, we will definitely try to send up follow-up emails responding to some of those. All right. So that was a great long introduction. So I'm going to begin with our first question. So I briefly explained what the HEAL program is, but I want to invite our panelists to share what did the HEAL program mean to you, because it was very intimate for us to facilitate that together. So I'm going to invite Victoria to start us off the conversation.
Yes, thank you. Welcome everybody. Yeah, I think one of the biggest impact of the group I worked with alongside my co-facilitator Alejandra Guerra, who's another expressive arts therapist, both graduates from the Create Institute. She's from Colombia and I'm from Venezuela. So we have very much in our own experiences at different parts. We both lived in the U.S. and then families migrated to Canada, and it. So we have in our own experiences, we have the experience of having migrated and having um, gone through the experience of not knowing anything about a city and then transitioning into understanding and being part of that environment. So with this group, we worked with queer women who were not only newcomers, but who were also carrying their own stories of sexuality, whether they were stories that were hidden from their families or their communities, stories where they had come out in their communities back home and then had to flee from that. So there's sort of a theme of a lot of masking, of covering and protecting. So this group, it just really brought out the how vulnerable we are as a community of like queer, gay, trans folks. We're a community that, as much support as there is globally for us, we can very quickly become vulnerable and individuals who are violented and who receive violence. So this space became a space where folks were sort of wrapped in comfort through the art that we were making.
Thank you. Thank you. And I love how you put that, the grabbed in comfort through art making. Thank you. So I'm going to pass it now to Afsane.
Yes. Um, well, if I were to kind of summarize it in one sentence, HEAL program sessions were for the participants was a home away from home. They actually came home when they arrived in the sessions because the safety was provided. There was an opportunity to connect and then through therapy and doing all interventions, healing happened, empowerment happened. And as one of the participants put it, I made a note here. It says, coming to heal program is self-care, which was so wonderful to hear because it is something that most women neglected about taking care of themselves. So that was a wonderful statement of what heal is, how unique it is.
Thank you. Thank you, Osane. And thank you for sharing that quote. It's so important to highlight participant voices as we speak about this. I'm going to pass it now to Madge.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad I'm going last with this one because Victoria and Afsane set it up beautifully and really conveyed what the Heal Project is like and to be part of. I think going into it, I knew that this was something that's really needed. So I worked with the Arab newcomer women's group. And uh, most of the participants were actually refugees, so they've been, mostly escaping war or war-torn areas, regions. And so for me, there was like an immediate resonance of that with myself, with my own history and background. And so there were moments where it felt like we didn't really need to say much to understand each other. And I think that was something that was very profound and meaningful for myself too. Sometimes even really hard and maybe even triggering. But I think that's actually what allowed for something really vulnerable, something really compassionate, something really meaningful to emerge and happen in the space. And I think also the what's so special about Heal itself is that the arts is that vessel, right? To hold it all when there are things that they feel unbearable, they are unbearable. And so like to have the arts as the container, as the facilitator for all of us, including me as a facilitator, right? So yeah, I think that's the curiosity, the creativity, the inner creative exploration of itself, that the art itself is what's so meaningful and special in combination with all of those other things that I mentioned around the shared experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And that's such an important component was that when we were, hiring for the HEAL program, it was so important that facilitators understood the cultural linguistic backgrounds because those are sometimes and often things that are very difficult to convey in verbal language. So before we enter into our second question, I'm just going to preface by saying the HEAL program had three main parts to it. In part one was a lot of psychoeducation, right? Safety and stabilization. It was really important that participants understood how to engage in self-regulation because we were going to be talking about very difficult issues. And so we often use movement and dance ribbons to showcase somatic resourcing, right? Using our bodies as a resource. In the part two, we focused on identity, culture, and community. All of those three themes is what we found in the literature review as very common themes in newcomer communities. As some of the panelists have mentioned, having a different home in many different places brings complexity to a person's identity. And then part three looked towards resilience, hope in the future. We know that trauma and violence can really define sometimes people's identities, but we really wanted to bring out kind of a different way of thinking about the self. So imagination, things like clay and painting and storytelling, all of that was also included. So just to note, we used many different modalities throughout the whole HEAL program. So this next question is, what specific adaptations were made to tailor the HEAL program for different cultural groups? And how did those changes affect participant outcomes? So I'm going to pass it to Madge first to talk about that.
Okay, yeah. So I think there were like two main challenges that I had to create some adaptations around for me, for the group specifically, is that one, because of the topic of domestic violence, this is something that is generally very taboo in Arab culture, not something that you talk about publicly. Even privately, sometimes that's hard to talk about. So I knew that going into it, I had to kind of approach it indirectly, but also I wanted to take into account the context of things, like not individualize it or make it into uh yeah, someone's like individual experience, but something that is contextual, that there's systemic factors at play, that there's so many levels to it that it can't just be reduced to, um a very isolated incident, right? So my approach was, how do I kind of naturalize it? How do I destigmatize it? And so I went through, like, I decided to go into a more of a psychoeducational, like informative path. So I focused on the nervous system. I mainly focused on polyvagal theory for those who might be familiar. So very like trauma informed of how does the body naturally respond to anything from like shock to violence to something funny happening to something comforting happening, right? So like covering all of the areas so that it becomes something that is very palpable and that isn't doesn't feel icky. There's no shame around it. That is just a human responding. And I really try to kind of also lean into using very concrete, practical examples of what that looks like in terms of like what happens to the nervous system, but also engage with like humor, with like culturally relevant jokes, even like using instances of like when something naturally funny happens in a space to like, really notice like, oh, notice how once we started laughing, maybe our perception widened, right? Like maybe we started, feeling more at ease. So really like engaging that way. And then the other challenge that I kind of connected with this is that the expressive arts specifically really pushes us to go into play in a very childlike manner, right? Like it goes into like really wants us to step into the unknown, into kind of like a bit of a formlessness, a bit of a messiness, a bit of an exploration. And that's not that again, there's a lot of, especially because I was working with women who are, let's say, late 30s into like early 60s. This was not something that was very appealing or like culturally appropriate to go into play that way. So again, I tried to uh, indirectly kind of nudge them towards that by being like, let's try this out to apply what we have learned about the nervous system. And so kind of engaging with it that way allows to like give it a frame so that it's not just step into the imaginations and and that also like it's a big ask, right? Like there's a lot of trust that we're asking them to offer us and each other in that. So just to slowly kind of give a frame and build that slowly, I think those were the two main adaptations for me.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for highlighting the effectiveness of knowledge and then application so that they really embody the things that they were learning about. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm gonna
I
pass.
will add like they would come back and be like, "Oh yeah, I like something happened last week with a friend
Yes.
and I gave her ice to hold," because one of the examples was like if you're in panic, you can hold some ice and stuff like that. They were really like taking with them, and yeah, I think that was very effective for especially newcomer Arab, culturally Arab migrant folks. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna pass it now to Afsane.
So I've worked with Farsi-speaking population, primarily from Afghanistan, and we had Iranians also, but majority were from Afghanistan, women from Afghanistan. So as in our culture, I'm originally from Iran, so it's a very kind of literal tradition. There's lots of poetry. Nature is extremely important, and so it's kind of interwoven into the culture and cultural identity and spirituality. So and it's a way of kind of understanding life through this metaphor related to nature. So I think that was kind of my focus. That the meaningful kind of, what are the symbols, cultural symbolism, what are the nature metaphors, and also how we all come together as a collective culture to create an art piece together, or sit around the table, eat together. So it's a very, very important, that connection brings a lot of comfort, I guess, wisdom, kind of interacting with one another. So the interventions were, mostly focused on kind of collectivist culture. So a sense of belonging, sense of family, community, and harmony. But obviously we started or incorporated kind of individual growth as we worked through the process of arts and creativity. So through all these, I think ultimately, it was, we strengthened, that the trust, the engagement, and the kind of psychological safety for the group, which was the foundation of healing.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate you sharing too about those cultural symbols. I think it's so important to tap into those resources. So I'll pass it to Victoria now.
Thank you. As I was listening to our two other panelists, I was reminded that we ended up having a lot of conversations around racism. Although we were a mixed group, there is a higher percentage of folks from Africa, different countries of Africa or the Caribbean. And we talked about the differences of, as an adult, growing up in a community where there's discrimination and there's oppression. Racism is almost something that is newly acquired once coming to Toronto. And it's not to say that they didn't experience racism in various ways as they interact with the rest of the world, but it just felt and looked different. And sort of, I was reminded of the delay of when a racist situation happens, and then it's about an hour later or a couple days later, there was like, oh, that feels terrible in my body. Or, wow, I can't stop crying. Or I just I couldn't eat for a couple of days because my stomach's wearing knots. So we shared a lot of those experiences. That was something unexpected. And then we pivoted the pre-designed curriculum to include a lot of dancing. We had the ribbons, and we kept going back to them. And the movement of having really hard conversations, the movement really helped then to sort of transform it and be able to leave the room with have it not only in a psychoeducational understanding of the impact and the trauma that lives in the body, but then also just a chance to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. And you bring up a really good point that, what was happening in their lives, they brought it to the program, right? It wasn't isolated. And so we had to constantly be dynamic and flexible and moldable, that the program really was being tailored every single week to each of our participant groups, right? And so in the next question, it's kind of very similar, but we're going to dive more into specific examples. What were memorable or specific examples of these cultural or contextual adaptations that really improved, not only the experience, but engagement, that retention, that safety piece that we're all talking about. And I'm going to pass it to Afsane first to get us started with this one.
I love I love this question because I do have few examples, but the most uh, powerful one that comes to mind, and it never leaves me, and it will never leave me, is the one when very first session I had planned to bring in some material, mostly organic material, and a bird to build a nest together with the participants. So it was such a powerful kind of collective uh, venture we went through and built a nest for the bird. It was so it kind of that the whole initial kind of introduction to heal program and to each other was building a home again, as I mentioned earlier, the heal was home away from home. So we actually started building this home, that sense of belonging, to create that sense of belonging, the sense of protection. It is a safe home, and everybody kind of put so much effort into making sure the home is built in a very solid foundation, the nest. And I one of the participants said, how can I build a nest for this bird when I cannot build a home for myself? As she was working in building the nest. And then by the end of that session, she said, oh, the bird is so happy because we all came together to build it for her, this nest for her. So again, this sense of collective care was very important, needing, wanting to have others to come and give helping hand. And the very last session, our 12th session, we did another nest, or not another nest, the same nest, but kind of refurbished it. The prompt was, let's see what this bird needs. And again, the same client, same participant said, smiled, and after they kind of everybody decorated the nest, she smiled and said, "Oh, look how much happier the bird is in her new home." It was so touching when to hear this, her comment, which also kind of in a way, it was the transformation of this nest kind of mirrored her own healing journey, which really has left such an impact on me, and most likely on everyone who participated and witnessed what happened. It was magical.
Yes, thank you, Afsane. And I am so grateful that you shared the nest building activity because we have since then, did so many iterations of building nests together, not only with communities, but with staff members as well. And I think that's the power of the arts and metaphor is that metaphors stretch beyond, what we can often foresee. And, just to add a tidbit, it's so relevant to newcomers because in my mind, right, newcomers are like birds, migratory birds that fly and nest in many different places. So it's a very beloved activity. So thank you. And I'm gonna pass it now to Victoria to share.
Thank you. One of the activities that touched my heart deeply was the doing our portraits. So we did a lot of exercises with our eyes closed or using our less dominant hand as a way of the participants acquiring quick tools to regulate their bodies when they're out in the world. Um, and we did line drawings of, if we imagine we're taking a selfie and then drawing that selfie on the page with our eyes closed using the less dominant hand, and then taking collage pieces and transforming and decorating, adorning our portraits. And the portraits were so vibrant and so deep. And once we shared our portraits, everyone had such deep connections to stories of back home, and like very committed answers to why they put a piece of red at the corner, or they glue a straw at the bottom. And like, it was, everything had so much meaning. These weren't just paper glued and pieces of material glued together. It all of a sudden became like a sculpture of live stories. And it was, we put them all together and took a picture of all of them together, and it was like a wall of portraits. And it was, yeah, really beautiful. And uh, like some of the stories that were commonly shared said they hadn't played with paper and with material in such a long time. They really reminded them of times when they were children, and how refreshing it felt to get the fingers sticky with glue and have to cut pieces and fit and draw and yeah. And so it was quite stimulating and really like unraveling, unearthing.
Yeah, thank you. And it is very unraveling and unearthing. And I love that aspect of seeing and envisioning ourselves differently, right? Those portraits were had so much depth to them. And I remember so many participants saying, yeah, I feel like a child again. And that was actually across all of our programs, that reclaiming or returning back to that childlikeness.
Mm.
Um, I'm gonna pass it now to Madge.
Yeah, a lot of what's been shared, I also resonate with in terms of thinking about the the group I facilitated for. But I think so. The main activity that really sticks out is the last one, which to draw on Afsani's uh, highlighting of nature and the power of nature. It was out in nature. It was in the park. I'm gonna talk about it, but before I go there, I do want to say like when I'm trying to go off of like what really sticks out or what I remember the most. And it's for me, it's a lot of the in-between moments, and a lot of the things that you don't expect or you don't plan. And there was a lot for the Arab group. There was a lot of like food sharing, food prepping of like next time I'm gonna bring this. And then a lot of also just like, look what I did at home creatively, right? Or like, look what I'm working on. And for some reason, those are the ones like I'm like, this is what I remember the most when I think about the group. But yeah, in terms of an activity itself, we took them out near the location at the Arab Community Center in Etobicoke. There was like a little park with a creek, like a very beautiful little river, and a lot of nature. And so we went out, we kind of set up there, and the main activity was again in kind of like applying what we learned about the nervous system is to walk around in complete silence and to just really engage with what's around us and with each other. So really like putting an emphasis on making eye contact. Like if we're near each other, like really looking at each other, noticing, nodding, saying hi, but without speaking. And what was so funny about it is that it was so hard for them to stay silent. And I had to like constantly kind of be like, and then they started kind of doing it to each other. But it was so noticeable how uh there was a like they started noticing and reflecting on how like they really relied on talking to as a cue of safety, as a cue of comfort. And that like even though we have like spent, 12 sessions together and built a lot, there was still it was in themselves, it was still very uncomfortable to just fully kind of step into that space of let's say the expressive arts, like unknown and trust and just being together, being present. But it was also like really fun and funny, right? Like it was something, it was a point that really stuck out to everybody that we were reflecting on. But we also like, there was no shaming of it. Of course, there was like a lot of like, well, now we know this is what we need. Like, we do need verbal affirmation. We do need verbal confirmation that we're okay, that we're safe, that you like me and I like you, that, we're both having a good time, right? Like, so yeah, so that really sticks out. And what also sticks out about it, and there was a noticeable shift in energy after we did that exercise from like a kind of like a lot of mental heightened energy to a little bit more embodied. And what was beautiful is that we naturally transitioned into like singing Arabic songs and kind of music making and sitting around and eating food. And it was just like yeah, it was very memorable, very beautiful, very natural. And thinking about this, I was like, oh, I think it would have been really insightful if we had done that in the beginning as an opening ritual,
Mhm.
like an art, like a nature-based opening ritual, or just out in nature doing some kind of opening ritual, and then return to it at the end, and then notice the shift, like what are the differences between the first time we did that versus the last time we did that? Like that was something that I think would be really interesting to do and explore.
Thank you, Madge. Thank you. And I remember they loved that outdoor nature session, which is so important. Something too for all, those program implementers out there. Like, how do we bring in nature into more of our programming?
Mm.
Something else that sticks out too is, yeah, even though the not even though, but like the 12 sessions is a very long time, right? We are with people for sometimes 3 months and more. And so in the greater scheme of life, I mean, 3 months seems short, but so much transformation can happen even in the first 2 weeks of a program like this. And I honestly, really, truly believe it's because it's an art-based program. Art just has that magical ability to build trust and safety in ways that maybe other forms cannot. Which leads me to, one of my final questions, which is why arts for newcomer populations. I mean, I think in this space, we all are artists and we believe in this power, but there are still some folks out there that may not know about the utility or even the usefulness of art. And I do want to add one more question to this, if that's okay, is what would have helped you as a facilitator as well? Because I know it wasn't easy. There were many challenges. So if you want to just touch upon that too, supports for facilitators, that would be amazing. And I'm going to pass it to Madge to start us off there.
Can I actually go either middle or last? Because I need a
Sure.
moment to
Yep.
think about that.
Yes,
Yeah.
you can. All right. I'm going to choose Victoria to start
Sure,
us off.
sure. Um, it's hard to say because I will state that one of the reasons, like it's rare for me, only my experience, me, myself, and I, for to experience a space where I'm facilitating and I'm solely facilitating. I mean, I show up to the space, materials are out, participants start coming. Christen and Christen's team had an incredible system of taking care of folks when they were coming in late, making sure the food was there. I mean, and Alejandra and I always participated whenever we need, and we were all there, and the participants also helped with the setup and the cleanup. This very collective effort, but the responsibility was on Christen and Christen's team to for the participants to come in and be participants and the facilitators to come in and be facilitators. So that to say that actually just, that is rare in my experience, and it made such a difference to offer and to be really present. Um, what else would I have needed further? I don't necessarily know that I would have needed further, but because we were working with such vulnerable populations and emergencies were coming up every week, housing emergencies, situations of violence, etc., settlement, like real life hard things were happening that we had to take care of it in the moment. And having understanding a little bit more what this emergency circle of care is for each participant, even if there's not one, then having that clarity, so that if someone is really dysregulated, what happens when the program is over, who is going to stay with them. And sure, we did a share amount of staying with our participants, but then what happens, if we have to go home, like who's, doors closed of the institution we're working at that's hosting the program. So I would say moving forward, that's something that stayed with me, is to really understand, that circle of care and the emergency folks to participants, especially if there's such vulnerable populations where life in Toronto is so hard that it is likely that they will be dealing with, or even in our lives as facilitators, that emergencies and crises will arise and can arise. And so how do we provide what does the support look like, and what are the resources that each individual is coming with or not?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And that's such a testament to facilitation teams, that it is truly a team. And for those on the call, who was part of the team when, Victoria's saying Christen and her team, it was myself, a peer researcher, so someone from the partner agency that we trained in not only research, but in also the program. We also had one of our research fellows with us to support with the data collection, the feedback surveys, all of that. And then we often had volunteers and placement students that also we trained as well. So you can see it's a huge, huge directly implementing team. And to Victoria's point, what is that safety network? And that has to be established at the very beginning of the program so that we are ready to face those dynamic emergencies along the way. So just something to think about, lots of preparations happening. And I think that's a very important point in the needs assessment, to ask participants who is in your community of care. All of those security questions need to be established at the very beginning. So thank you for those points. And I'm going to pass it to Afsane now.
Sure, perfect. On what just Victoria said, the fact that with your leadership, Christine, the environment was beautifully set for healing. It was very, very important. So safety comes before everything else. Same thing for us as facilitators. How do we feel safe walking into an unknown space, somewhere we are not familiar with? Of course, we use all kinds of, of what we have learned and accustomed to, calm our own bodies, in order to calm our minds, and we pass that on to participants. But the healing environment is what is accepted. We feel accepted, we feel respected. And then same thing happens with the participants. They feel accepted and respected. So also I find working with any groups, any populations, I really trust they have their own agency. each person, they have own strength and agency, and we come across their lives, at some point in their lives, and just knowing that you know programs like Heal is out there, or has been out there, to facilitate participants in their journey, just the part of their journey. I think it's very heartwarming warming for me, because it got the participants out of isolation. It made it help them gain confidence. I truly noticed that. It was evident. And we built on their resilience that they already had. So it has been an honor to be part of this whole project.
Yeah, thank you, Afsane, and highlighting that strength-based approach, right? And that's an interesting point because one of our eligibility criterias was that they had to be a survivor of domestic violence. And this kind of victim language honestly didn't work for a lot of them. A lot of them didn't want to be identified as that. And so your point to looking at their strengths and resilience and yeah, realizing that they have resources themselves really helped them, I think, come away from that victim language that we often have in a lot of our grants and projects and even the ways that we talk about populations. So I'll pass it now to Madge.
Yeah, I think like remembering their agency, like Afsane said, is such a powerful resource for the facilitator to remember. Yeah, I needed a moment because there was a moment for me where I became very dysregulated. Um, we were sharing stories from home and of the homes that we had to leave. And one participant got really emotional. She's a Syrian refugee talking about her home, and it was very profound, very resonant to the point that everybody in the circle started crying. And then I, as a facilitator, could feel my own emotions and own triggers and own grief come up. And I was in a kind of panic of like, okay, but how do I hold this now? Because now I need to go outside. Um, and I remember the like just me being in the facilitator mind of like, I really need to hold this together. I think that's actually what made it worse for me. And I did step outside. I took my time. And I think if I would say what facilitators need, that ability to be flexible and be like, okay, this is the intention or goal of today's workshop, today's session, but there's a lot of adaptability, and we don't have to if things come up, if we can. So that really allowed for me to be able to like take the space, really ground, really do my own apply what I was teaching, like really be like, okay, how do I, let my nervous system know that yes, this is hard and it's okay. Um, and then to Christen, I would echo Victoria in terms of like the Christen and the team. I think every facilitator needs a Christen. I mean, there's only one Christen, but someone like Christen is unbelievable. I cannot like emphasize that enough. I've done this before. I've done different groups, and I wouldn't say I've had a Christen in those experiences, and I really like I could feel the difference of there were moments where I would just be like, Christen, like let's just check in, let's just talk, and we just sit together, we talk, and that's all that was needed in that moment. And so yeah, I think that summarizes all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you, everyone. And again, just pointing to the fact that we don't do this alone and we are not alone. And I agree. I think that's how we, built the program was to not only hold participants, but to hold facilitators because we often, as facilitators, experience very similar things that our participants do. And so when you have that shared bond, it's a strength, but it's also comes with all of those, challenges as well. So,
Like, I forgot to
yeah.
say that like the session after that one, because I was like, oh my God, I ruined everything. Afterwards, I went into my own spiral. When we returned, all the participants were like, that was such a good, like, thank you so much for like allowing us the space to cry and grieve together, right? And so again, that like also just like being again like a reminder of agency, but also like being open to not knowing or to the surprises of the impact of what a session is for people.
100%. And it goes to show that, participants value us being human, right? Being human and being transparent about the things that we also, I mean, obviously with boundaries, but it was so important, like you're saying, they were so much more connected to each other and you and that therapeutic bond is so foundational to successful programs. And to those, managers or program coordinators out there, who you hire as a facilitator dictates so much of how it ends up playing out, that flow, that resonance that they have with participants. So, we have a couple minutes, which is so wonderful because we do have a comment and question. But before we go there, I just want to make sure, Afsane or Victoria, is there anything else you would like to add before we go to the Q&A?
No, 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 no.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. All right. So thank you, May, for putting a comment and question in the chat. So I'm just going to read it out here. So May says, I'm a graduate of expressive arts therapy and I am from Myanmar. With ongoing war and conflicts nationwide and an increasing number of displaced people and unsafe situations day by day in the country. Today's discussion helped me a lot with my work in my community. If possible, please share what kind of session flow or process would be better practice for refugee and displaced communities with ongoing and past trauma experiences. As the second part of this is any tips or suggestions for supporting those populations, whether that's different ages, gender, vulnerable groups in expressive arts activities and community involvement. Thank you, May, for that question. I think you bring up a really good point that working with refugees and displaced communities is very unique and they face very distinct barriers, especially when engaging with the arts. So I'm going to open it up to the panelists. Um, yeah, what is your take on working with refugees and displaced communities around session flow and any tips or tricks that come to mind?
I'll jump in quickly. I would say what I mentioned earlier is understanding sort of safety circles, circles of care. When things come up in a session, where do they go? Who do they contact? So, sort of thinking about those paths before the sessions, and being able to be really adaptable because necessities and story and memories will sort of um, derail or just create a new path for a session. So really the flexibility, the staying present so that we can stay flexible and adaptable.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. Yeah, Afsane or Maj?
Yeah. I was, and being trauma informed, very important. Culturally responsive is another one, because healing, I think it becomes more meaningful when the therapy is built on the strengths, as we mentioned before, on the tradition, on the wisdom of each client's lived experience. And so those are all we need to keep in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I would also echo like the shared identity, the shared background, the language. If you can get somebody who speaks the same language, I think that's very essential, actually. Because language is like it's a whole world, right? Like there's so much nuance in expressions and different things that people say or do um and then there's also the like, for me personally, as I'm Palestinian, like for me, there's also the political aspect, right? Like you cannot divorce that. Like, using kind of political neutral language sometimes in spaces is a bit of a red flag, right? Because you don't know what you're walking into, you don't know what you might expect. So I think the more clear and direct and honest and transparent the space is about its position and the facilitator's position and all of that, and like what's, what um the like shared understanding with the space of like what we can talk about, what we can express, what we can say, and not have to like explain ourselves or be self-conscious or what the hyper vigilant about is the word. Hyper vigilance. So yeah, I think those things. What else? I do want to say that for some reason, nature is calling again. Like I think there is, like Afsane said, there's so much power to drawing on these things, these elements that are all around us that are feel like they're always there to actually like remind us of like greater things or being present or like flow or shifting and changing and I think, yeah, I think that's like such a universal thing that we can all kind of use together. So if you want like a quick tip, I would say like maybe yeah, like trying to approach it from a place of nature, right? Like any exercises where it's like really like picturing yourself as a tree with your roots down into the ground and your branches out and really feeling the breeze and the sun and really getting into the senses and the elements. And I think those can go a long way. They sound simple, but I think they really go a long way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. All right, I will.
I can
Yeah, go
add,
ahead.
I can add very quick something because it just brought some memories. This nature-based activity, one of them we did was about a tree. Which tree do you identify with? And it was a deeply engaging kind of activity. And sure enough, participants, from Afghanistan and Iran, that part of the world, the trees they chose were so unique. One chose to be a sour cherry tree, another one white peach, not the ones we have here in Canada. Another one was a pomegranate tree. So these were like, and again, it triggered so many memories about back home, about nature, about families. The symbol of tree is a fantastic one to kind of start a prompt.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for adding that. And May, thank you for your question and comment because in a world with many wars that still continue to this day, displacement is going to be ongoing. And I want to just add to I will share in the follow-up email. There's a lot of resources out there, not only including, thank you, Marco, for putting our Access Lines Arts website, but there's a lot of humanitarian reports and toolkits that talk about the integration of arts in war and conflict zone places and using theater, as a way to bring people together in very harsh conditions. So I'll put that in the follow-up email. So before we end, thank you, everyone. I mean, thank you for the panelists sharing very concrete examples of maybe some things that you can try out in your practice, but also I hope it sparks greater conversation with you and your network and the people that you work with, because these webinars are just a start to, some of these conversations. And 2 weeks from now, all of these panelists will be back and we'll talk more about facilitation, facilitator support, what we can do about that, because it is important. I encourage you to follow us on social media. We just published a series on the Healthy Debate platform, so you can take a look at that. And We also have another webinar happening next Tuesday, July 7th, same time, 12 to 1 o'clock, to hear about the research side of things, the research and evaluation. How do we even do data collection and analysis to learn about all of these beautiful moments in a more kind of research perspective? So you don't want to miss that. So until then, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next week. Bye
Thank
now.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.